Chosen one. What if the confusion you've been fighting, the kind that sits in your chest at 3 inches the morning and won't let you breathe? What if that was never confusion at all? What if heaven has not gone silent? What if heaven has been positioning you for the final step? Listen to me right now. I need you to hear this before anything else. You have been carrying something heavy, not just hard days, not just bad seasons. I'm talking about years of holding people up while quietly falling apart inside. Years of praying faithfully, consistently, and watching the ceiling like it was a wall. Years of watching people around you move forward while you stood still, wondering if God somehow forgot your address. That isolation you felt, the way old friendships quietly dissolved, the way rooms that once felt like home started feeling foreign, the dreams that felt closer 5 years ago than they do today. You called it failure. God calls it formation. You called it abandonment. Heaven calls it repositioning. Here is the truth that will change how you see your entire last season. You are not behind. You are not broken. You are not being punished. You are standing on a runway. And anyone who has ever flown knows right before liftoff, the shaking gets violent. The ground trembles beneath you. Everything rattles. Your instinct says something is wrong, but that shaking? That's not danger. That's departure. You have had 1 foot in the old room and 1 foot at a new door, and that threshold space, that in-between ache, that I can't go back but I can't see forward feeling, that is the sign. Before this message is over, you will understand exactly why your last season had to break the way it did. There is one thing chosen people always misread right before breakthrough. And near the end, I'm going to show you why the step you fear most may be the very door you've been praying for. Type final step in the comments right now if this is already hitting your spirit. Stay with me. This word builds in layers. You are not late. You are not lost. You are standing in the last painful inches before movement. Can I tell you something that nobody in your life has had the courage to say to you? The years you spent invisible, the seasons where you prayed and heard nothing, served and received nothing, gave everything and watched others get the credit, those years were not wasted. They were watched. Every single moment you kept going when you had every reason to quit. Heaven had its eyes on you. But here's what I need you to sit with right now, because this next truth is going to either shake you or heal you, maybe both. God does not hide broken things. He hides chosen things. Think about what gets hidden in this world. You don't lock away what has no value. You don't place in darkness what you intend to discard. You hide what is precious. You conceal what is sacred. You protect what the wrong hands would destroy too soon. And God, the same God who numbers every hair on your head, who knew your name before your mother spoke it, He looked at your life, looked at your assignment, looked at what He was building inside you. And He said, "Not yet. This one is not ready for the room I'm preparing." That's not rejection. That is divine protection. Joseph didn't understand it either. He had the dream. God gave him the vision personally, a picture of his future so clear he could describe it out loud. And then, almost immediately, everything collapsed. His own brothers threw him into a pit, sold him like he was worth nothing. And Joseph spent years in prison, faithful, forgotten, filing away in obscurity, while people who deserved his chains walked free. But here's what the Bible doesn't skip over. The Lord was with Joseph, Genesis 39-21, in the prison, in the pit, in the hiddenness. God wasn't absent during Joseph's disappearance. God was constructing something that the palace could not have held if it had arrived any earlier. Some of you have been Joseph. You had the dream. You saw it. You believed it. And then life threw you somewhere dark, and you've been wondering ever since, did I imagine it? Did I get it wrong? Did God change His mind? He did not change His mind. He is still building the palace. He just hasn't shown you the architecture yet. David was anointed king in a field. No announcement, no crowd, no crown. Samuel poured the oil. The Spirit of God came upon him, and then David went back to watching sheep, back to obscurity, back to being overlooked by his own father, back to the field where nobody saw him, anointed, hidden, still waiting. And Moses, 40 years. 40 years in the wilderness before God spoke from a burning bush. 40 years of what must have felt like exile, like failure, like a life that had completely derailed. But wilderness is not waste. Wilderness is where God does his deepest work, because in the wilderness there are no crowds to perform for. There is no applause to chase. There is only you and God, and the stripping away of everything you thought you needed to be great. Moses came out of the wilderness with something no palace could have given him: a broken ego and an unbreakable calling. Now let me speak directly to some of you who have lived long enough to know what disappointment really costs. You have given your best years to places that never fully valued you. You poured into people who left. You were loyal to institutions that moved on without even saying goodbye. You watched others, people with less experience, less wisdom, less sacrifice, walk into rooms you spent decades preparing for. And you kept asking the same question, maybe in the middle of the night when no one could hear you. Why doesn't anyone see what I carry? Here is your answer. You were hidden because what God placed inside you was too sacred to be exposed to the wrong season. Some doors had to close not because you failed, but because walking through them would have introduced you to a version of your future that couldn't hold the full weight of your calling. Some relationships had to fade because they were built for the old version of you, and God refused to let you stay small to keep them comfortable. You kept trying to make old spaces hold the new person he was forming, and the spaces kept breaking. Not because you were wrong, because you had outgrown them. The potter doesn't put the finished vessel in the showroom while it's still on the wheel. The seed doesn't grow in the display case. The foundation is never the part people photograph, but nothing stands without it. You have been the foundation. Maybe you were hidden because you were too sacred to be exposed too early. Maybe the reason no one has seen you yet is because heaven is still putting finishing touches on something that will be impossible to ignore once it's released. Type in the comments right now, God was building me, because that's exactly what he's been doing. In every silent season, in every overlooked moment, in every prayer that felt like it hit the ceiling and bounced back empty, he was building you. But hiddenness alone is not the whole story, because seasons change, construction ends, and when the foundation is complete, the house goes up, fast, visible, undeniable. The real question is not why were you hidden. The real question is this: what happens when heaven decides the training phase is over? The reason you were buried is because heaven never called you buried. Heaven called you planted, and what is planted is about to break ground. Something is moving in your life right now. You can feel it. That low, persistent trembling beneath everything you thought was stable. The friendships that quietly dissolved. The habits that no longer satisfy. The routines that once felt like home now feel like a cage you can't explain. And if you're honest, deeply honest, you've been afraid to name what you're feeling, because naming it makes it real. So let me name it for you. Your life is shaking, not falling apart, not collapsing, shaking. And there is a difference that will change everything about how you move through the next chapter of your life. The book of Hebrews 12:27 says this: the removing of what can be shaken, that is, created things so that what cannot be shaken may remain. Read that again. Slowly. God does not shake what is worthless. He shakes what cannot carry the future he has planned for you. That relationship that quietly ended, the desire for things that used to bring you joy gone like smoke. That strange emotional heaviness that sits on your chest even when nothing is technically wrong. That is not depression. That is not spiritual failure. That is divine separation. God is removing scaffolding. When a building is finished, truly finished, structurally complete, ready to stand on its own, The workers don't celebrate first. They remove the scaffolding. And in that moment, to anyone watching from the outside, it can look like destruction. It can look like something is being torn away. But the architect knows what looks like loss is actually reveal. Chosen one, God is not tearing your life down. He is removing what was only ever meant to be temporary support. Now let me ask you something that might be uncomfortable. What have you been leaning on that was never meant to hold your full weight? A comfort that became a crutch? A relationship that kept you emotionally sedated instead of spiritually sharp? A routine that gave you the feeling of movement while keeping you perfectly, safely stuck? Jesus said it plainly in Matthew 9-17. New wine cannot be put into old wineskins. If it is, the wineskins burst. The new thing God is pouring into your life is too powerful, too expansive, too alive for the container you've been living in. And here is the part that nobody wants to preach, but somebody in this moment needs to hear. Not every loss in your life is demonic. Not every closed door is the enemy's attack. Not every season of silence is God's absence. Some losses are God's mercy. Some closed doors are God's direction. Some silences are God speaking in a frequency your old ears couldn't hear. The storm that stripped the dead branches from your life, it wasn't sent to destroy you. It was sent to prepare you for spring. But here is where it gets real. The shaking hurts. I will not stand here and tell you otherwise, because what was shaken, those things comforted you. Those people mattered to you. Those habits, those environments, those familiar feelings, they were real to you. And losing real things produces real grief. You are allowed to grieve what God removed. You are allowed to feel the weight of this season. Grief is not weakness. Grief is the price of having loved something genuinely. But grief was never meant to become a residence. You were not built to live in the ruins of what God already finished with. And this is where most people make their biggest mistake, right before destiny opens. They misread the shaking as evidence that God has abandoned the plan. They feel the disruption, the emotional heaviness, the strangeness of this season, and they turn back. One step before the breakthrough. They go back to the old comfort, back to the old environment, back to the old version of themselves that God already outgrew because the shaking felt too violent to mean anything good. And heaven watches, and heaven grieves. Chosen one, hear me. The shaking is not proof you are falling apart. The shaking is proof that what can be shaken is finally leaving your life. That is not punishment. That is preparation. That is not God forgetting you. That is God finishing something so he can begin something else. Hebrews 12:28, right after the verse about shaking, says this: Therefore, since we are receiving a kingdom that cannot be shaken, let us be thankful. Receiving, present tense, active, right now. While the old things shake and fall, you are simultaneously receiving something unshakable, something eternal. Something no circumstance, no economy, no relationship, no diagnosis, no delay can touch. But you have to let the shaking do its work. You cannot hold on to the scaffolding and walk into the building at the same time. So right now, in this moment, I need you to make a decision in your spirit. Will you trust the shaking? Will you look at the disruption in your life and say, this is not the end of my story. This is the clearing before the harvest. This is the winter soil preparing unseen life. If that's your answer, if something in you is stirring right now, type final step in the comments. Let that be your declaration. And do not leave this message halfway, because what comes next, the next layer of this word, explains the exact mistake that causes chosen people to turn back one step before their breakthrough arrives. You've survived the shaking. Now it's time to understand what's standing on the other side of it. You stayed with me. Good, because this is where the message stops being comfortable. You felt it in the first section, that recognition, that stirring. Something in your spirit said, yes, this is me. But now I need to ask you something that most teachers won't ask, because most teachers want you to feel good and come back next Sunday. I need you to feel free. So here is the question heaven has been waiting for you to answer. Why haven't you moved yet? Not why haven't you prayed more? Not why haven't you believed harder? You've done that. For years, you've done that. The question is simpler and it cuts deeper. Why haven't you moved? Because here is what I've watched happen to chosen people just like you, over and over again. They don't miss their moment because they stopped believing. They miss it because they kept negotiating. God, just show me one more sign. Lord, just give me a little more clarity first. If you just confirm it one more time, I'll go. And heaven looks down and says, I already told you. Twice, 3 years ago. In that quiet moment you've never told anyone about. You know what God said. You've known for a while now. The problem was never clarity. The problem is that the old version of you is still in the room, asking for permission to stay comfortable. That is not confusion. That is negotiation, dressed up as faith. The book of James says it plainly. Faith without works is dead, not wounded, not sleeping, dead. And yet here you stand, full of belief, full of prayer, full of worship, and your feet haven't moved an inch toward what God showed you. I'm not saying this to shame you. I'm saying this because I know what it costs to wait too long. I've watched people carry the weight of an unanswered yes until their body gave out under the pressure of their own disobedience. You don't want that to be your story. Now let me speak directly to you because I know who's watching this. You're not 25. You've lived enough to know that not every promise comes back around. You've buried some dreams already. You've grieved some doors that closed and never reopened. And so when God puts something new in front of you now, everything in you that's been wounded says, be careful. You've been here before. You've stepped out before and it hurt. And I want you to hear me say this with every ounce of love I carry. That caution kept you safe. But at some point, caution becomes disguised disobedience. After everything you've survived, the losses, the long nights, the prayers that felt like they bounced off the ceiling, caution feels like wisdom. It looks like wisdom. It sounds reasonable. It sounds mature. But wisdom that never moves is just fear wearing a suit. Think about Abraham. God told him to take Isaac, his son, his promise, the very thing God had given him, and place him on the altar. And the Bible says, Abraham rose early in the morning to obey. He didn't ask for a second confirmation. He didn't wait for a sign. He didn't say, Lord, are you sure? Because this doesn't make sense to me. He moved. Before he understood. Before he could see how it would end. And it was only in the act of releasing hand open, fist unclenched, control surrendered that God said, stop, I have what you need, now I can give it back. Transformed. The miracle didn't come before the surrender. It came through it. That is the final step most chosen people resist. Not the big public declaration, not the dramatic moment on the stage, not the announcement to the world. The final step is the private yes before the public miracle. It is the moment alone, in your kitchen, or on your knees beside your bed, when you stop asking heaven to bless what heaven already told you to release. Read that again. Let it land. You have been the comfortable seat you've been occupying while your actual assignment sits unclaimed. You cannot cross a bridge and stay on the same side. The moment you move forward, the old ground disappears behind you. That's not a threat. That is the design of divine transition. Here is what surrender actually looks like, not religiously, not abstractly, but in real life. It looks like making the phone call you've been avoiding for 6 months. It looks like saying yes to the thing that has no guaranteed outcome. It looks like releasing the timeline you built and trusting the one God holds. It looks like open hands instead of clenched fists. An open hand can receive. A clenched fist holds on to what's already dying. You are not confused because God is unclear. You are conflicted because part of you is still trying to protect yourself from a disappointment that surrender might prevent entirely. The final step is this. Stop asking heaven to bless what heaven already told you to release. That's it. That's the whole thing. Everything else, the breakthrough, the open doors, the restoration, the vindication, it's on the other side of that one private, trembling, courageous yes. Not a perfect yes, not a fearless yes, just a real one. Type "I release it" in the comments right now if you know exactly what God has been asking you to surrender. You know what it is. You've known for a while. So what does that surrender actually look like in real life? Not in theory, not in a prayer journal, but practically step by step, in the middle of the life you're actually living? That's exactly where this message turns next. Let me ask you something. Nobody else has been bold enough to ask you. When was the last time you sat in a room full of people you've known for years, people who love you, and still felt completely, inexplicably alone? Not lonely. Alone. There's a difference. Lonely is an emotion. What you've been feeling is deeper than emotion. At your age, you know the difference. You've lived long enough to know when something is just a mood and when something is a movement. And what has been stirring inside you? That is not a mood. That is a movement. Here is how you know this message was sent directly to your spirit. You've noticed it, haven't you? The things that used to hold your attention just don't anymore. The shows, the noise, the scroll, the small talk. The things that used to feel like comfort now feel like static. Like you're trying to tune into a frequency and everything around you is interference. That's not aging. That's not depression. That's your spirit outgrowing the signal. Think of a radio when you're between stations. All you hear is noise, confusion, crackling, nothing clear. But that noise isn't the destination. That noise means you are turning the dial. You are moving towards something clearer, something truer, something that has been broadcasting your name this entire time. You are not losing your mind. You are finding your frequency. And here are the signs. You've been grieving something you cannot fully name. Not a person. Not a loss you can point to. Just this low, quiet ache, like something is ending, like a chapter is closing, and nobody around you can see the page turning. You've tried to explain it. You couldn't find the words, so you carried it alone. That grief is sacred. It means your spirit already knows what your mind hasn't been told yet. Old conversations leave you drained now. What once felt like fellowship now feels like friction. You sit at the table and smile, but inside, you are somewhere else entirely. You're not being antisocial. You are being separated. There is a difference between isolation as punishment and isolation as preparation, and what God is doing in you right now is the second one. Elijah felt it under that juniper tree. David felt it in the caves of Adullam. Even Jesus felt it in Gethsemane, surrounded by people, yet carrying something nobody around him could hold. Your tolerance for fake peace has collapsed. The pretending exhausts you now. The performances. The "I'm fine when you're not fine." Something in you refuses to keep settling for a version of peace that costs you your authenticity. That refusal? That is discernment rising. Proverbs 20:27 says, "The spirit of a person is the lamp of the Lord, searching out the innermost parts." Your lamp is searching. That's why everything dim is starting to feel unbearable. You feel pulled toward prayer, toward stillness, toward something interior and sacred that you can't always explain to others. Early mornings, quiet moments, a hunger that food won't touch and entertainment won't satisfy. That pull is not random. That pull is a summons. And here is the one that will stop you cold. You feel both exhausted and strangely expectant at the same time. Tired but not ready to quit. Worn but somehow wide awake. That contradiction makes no natural sense. But spiritually, it makes every sense. You are like a room that has been outgrown by the person living inside it. The walls aren't wrong. You've just gotten bigger than the space. Those old shoes, the identity, the role, the version of yourself you've been walking in for years, they once served you beautifully, but they don't fit anymore. And no matter how many times you try to break them back in, your spirit keeps saying, these were never meant to take you where you're going next. This is not a crisis of faith. This is a crisis of expansion. Here is what nobody tells you about spiritual transition. It feels lonely first, because your spirit arrives at the new place before your circumstances do, before your surroundings catch up, before the people around you understand the shift. You're not crazy. You're not confused. You are simply early. And the reason nobody around you fully understands what you've been feeling, the reason you can't quite find someone who gets it, is because this shift was never for the crowd. It was for the called. Hear me say that again. This was never for the crowd. It was for the called. And you are sitting here, watching this, feeling every single word land somewhere specific inside your chest, because you are one of them. You have been picked up by a signal that most people around you cannot receive. Not because they're bad people, but because this transmission wasn't addressed to them. It was addressed to you. Isaiah 43:19. See, I am doing a new thing. Now it springs up. Do you not perceive it? Do you perceive it? Because it is already springing up inside you right now, even if you can't see it with your natural eyes yet. If everything I've just described has been your secret, silent season, if these signs are the language of your last 12 months, then I need you to do one thing right now. Go to the comments. Write, "This is me." That's your declaration. That's your acknowledgement that you are not imagining it, that something real is happening, that this message found you on purpose. Because now that you know the shift is real, now that you can name what you've been feeling, one question remains. What exactly is God preparing you to become? Stay with me, because that answer is what this entire message is building toward, and it will change the way you see everything that comes next. Let me ask you something that might shake you. What if the reason your breakthrough has not arrived yet is not because God is slow, but because you are not yet who the breakthrough requires? Sit with that. Because here is what nobody talks about in the faith community. We pray for the blessing, we fast for the open door, we believe for the miracle, but we rarely stop to ask the most dangerous question of all. Am I built to carry what I'm asking for? God is not withholding from you. God is working on you. And there is a profound difference between those two realities. One makes you a victim, the other makes you a vessel. Think about the olive. It doesn't release its oil by sitting in peace. It releases its oil under pressure, crushing, weight, force. And only then, only after the pressing, does the oil flow. The oil that heals. The oil that anoints. The oil that lights the lamp in a dark room. You have been under pressure. You have felt the weight. And you have been asking God, why won't you just lift this? But what if He's not pressing you to punish you? What if He is pressing you to produce something in you that only pressure can release? Your pain is not wasted. Your pain is becoming oil. And someone in your future, someone who is broken, someone who is barely holding on, they are going to need exactly what your suffering is producing right now. Your mess becomes your message. Your wound becomes your weapon. Romans 8:28 says it plainly, all things work together for good to those who are called according to His purpose. Not some things, not the comfortable things, all things. The betrayal, the diagnosis, the delay, the silence, all of it, working together. But here is what God is specifically building in you before He moves you. He is not just changing your address, He is changing your capacity. He is replacing panic with steadiness. Because where you are going, people will be looking to you when the ground shakes. You cannot lead in crisis if crisis still controls you. So He has been allowing the storms not to drown you, but to teach you to stand in the water. He is replacing dependency with discernment. Chosen ones are not carried into their assignment on someone else's revelation. They learn to hear for themselves. The long nights of isolation, the stripping away of voices that used to guide you that was not cruelty. That was God teaching you to recognize His voice above every other voice. He is replacing delay with courage. You have been waiting for the perfect moment, for more confirmation, for the fear to leave. But let me tell you something about courage that took me years to understand. Courage does not come before the step. Courage is born in the step. You will not feel ready. You were never supposed to feel ready. You were supposed to go anyway. And this is where it gets deep. God is building in you something that cannot be faked, cannot be manufactured, and cannot be inherited from someone else. He is building inner authority, not the kind that comes from a title, not the kind that comes from a platform or a position or how many people follow you. I'm talking about the authority that comes from secret obedience, the decisions you made when no one was watching, the integrity you held when compromise would have been so much easier, the worship you offered in the room where no one applauded. That is where real authority is forged. Think about steel. You don't create steel in a comfortable room. You create steel in a furnace. Extreme heat, tremendous pressure, repeated refinement. And what comes out the other side is something that cannot be broken by ordinary force. It has been made unbreakable by the very process that looked like destruction. That furnace you have been standing in. That is not the enemy winning. That is your character being hardened into steel. Ephesians 6 warns us we do not wrestle against flesh and blood. The real battle has never been the job, the relationship, the diagnosis, the finances. The real battle has always been internal, and God has been training you for it. He is building compassion in you, not the soft, comfortable kind that speaks in platitudes, but the refined compassion that only comes through pain. The kind where you can sit with someone in their darkest moment and not flinch because you have been there. The kind where your presence alone carries healing because you were healed from that very wound. Isaiah 43:19 breathes over your life right now. Behold, I am doing a new thing. Do you not perceive it? The question is not whether God is moving. The question is, do you have eyes trained enough to see it? Chosen does not mean superior. Chosen means responsible. Chosen means entrusted with light during the darkest hours. Chosen means your life is not just about your comfort, it is about your assignment. The people who are waiting for what God has built in you, the lives that are tethered to your obedience. God is not merely preparing a blessing for you. God is preparing you for what only the prepared can carry. If this message is strengthening you, share it right now with someone who has been fighting a hidden battle. Somebody else needs this confirmation today. Be the vessel that carries this word to them, because here is where we go next. You have been built, you have been pressed, you have been forged. But there is one final internal war that still stands between you and everything God has prepared. And that next phase, the one you have been believing for, cannot begin until that war is settled. You felt it the moment this message started speaking to your life. Something shifted, something stirred deep in your chest, and almost immediately, something else rose up to fight it. That's not coincidence. That is warfare. And I need you to understand what's actually happening to you right now, because most people misread this moment completely. They feel the resistance, and they think it means stop. They feel the weight, and they think it means wrong direction. They feel the fear, and they assume it means not yet. But what if everything you're feeling right now is not a red light? What if it's proof you're finally close? Let me name what's been happening in your mind. Not generally. Specifically, suddenly, out of nowhere, old memories have been surfacing. Mistakes you thought were buried years ago. Faces of people who hurt you. Versions of yourself you worked so hard to leave behind, showing back up at the door of your mind like they never left. You've been second-guessing decisions you already made in peace. replaying conversations that ended long ago, feeling inadequate in ways you haven't felt since you were young and afraid and had nothing. Old temptations you defeated whispering again. Old voices that told you you were too much, too little, too late speaking again. And underneath all of it, this crushing fear. What if I make the wrong move? What if I step forward and it falls apart? What if I've misread God this entire time? That fear is real. I'm not dismissing it, but I need to tell you something that will change how you interpret everything you've been walking through. The enemy does not waste ammunition on people who are staying still. Read that again. Let it land. Hell does not mobilize against someone who poses no threat. Darkness does not fight hard for territory it has already won. If you were going nowhere, if your life was already locked down, already surrendered, already spiritually defeated, there would be no war. The intensity of the battle you're in right now is not evidence of your weakness. It is evidence of your assignment. Ephesians 6:12 tells us plainly, "We wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world." This is not a metaphor. This is a map. You are not fighting your own mind. You are not simply battling depression or anxiety or old age or regret. There are forces that understand what you are standing at the edge of, and they are fighting to make sure you never take the final step, because they know what's on the other side of that door. Think about this. When did Pharaoh chase hardest after Israel? After the release had already been declared. The plagues were done. The night of Passover had passed. God had already spoken freedom over his people, and that is when Pharaoh gathered his chariots. That is when the army came thundering behind them at the edge of the Red Sea. They weren't being chased because they were going backward. They were being chased because they were leaving. You are being chased right now because something in you has already started moving. The resistance didn't increase because you're losing. It increased because something in your spirit has already started standing up, and what has been holding you down for years can feel it. And I know you're tired. I'm not going to pretend that this is easy. Some of you have been fighting this battle for decades, not months, not one hard year. Decades of carrying faith like a torch in a windstorm. Decade after decade, watching the flame flicker, wondering if you had the strength to keep your hand around it one more night. You are exhausted in a way that sleep cannot fix, in a way that vacation cannot touch. You are soul tired, spirit weary. And the thought of fighting one more round, of trusting one more time, of believing, after everything you've already believed through, it feels like too much. But beloved, that exhaustion you feel, that is not the exhaustion of someone who has failed. That is the exhaustion of someone who has endured. Romans 5:3 says, "Suffering produces perseverance, not comfort, not shortcuts. Perseverance, the kind of endurance that gets built only in the fire, only in the long nights, only in the seasons that felt like they would never end." God has not been watching you suffer. He has been building something in you that cannot be manufactured any other way. And here is the moment I need you to hear most clearly. That thing you've been calling a relapse, that old pattern that resurfaced, that familiar darkness that came back, that version of fear you thought you'd already conquered years ago. What if that is not a relapse at all? What if that is the last scream of what can no longer keep you? What if it came back with such violence, not because it's winning, but because it knows it's losing? A storm fights hardest right before the sky breaks open. Every mother in labor knows the pain peaks right before the miracle arrives. The pressure doesn't mean it's over. The pressure means it's time. Type, "I know this battle" in the comments right now if this is describing your life, because you are not alone in this war. And you are not as far from the door as the battle is trying to make you believe. The question now is this: how do you cross the threshold without collapsing under the weight of the war? That is the turning point. And that is exactly where we are going next. Can I tell you something that nobody else is going to say to you today? You already know what your next step is. You've known for a while. maybe months, maybe years. You felt it quietly pressing against your chest every morning when you wake up. That nudge, that whisper, that thing God placed in you so long ago you almost convinced yourself it was just a dream you had once. But it wasn't a dream, and deep down you know that. So here's the question that matters more than anything else in this message. Why haven't you moved? Not because you lack faith, not because God stopped speaking, but because somewhere along the way you made a decision, maybe without even realizing it, that you would only step forward once you could see the entire staircase. And chosen one, that is not how God operates. That has never been how God operates. Psalm 119 to 105 doesn't say, "Your word is a floodlight for my path." It says, "Your word is a lamp unto my feet." A lamp, one step, enough light for right now. Not the whole plan, not the 10-year blueprint, not the guarantee that nothing will go wrong. Just this step, this moment, this obedience. God has never once promised you clarity for the entire journey. He promised you His presence through it. And there is a devastating difference between those two things that too many people are sleeping on. You have been waiting for certainty when God has been calling you toward courage. Now let me speak to something specific, something that has been quietly stealing from you. There are voices in your atmosphere, and I don't just mean people, I mean thoughts, memories, old wounds that have been whispering a particular lie. A lie so familiar you stopped recognizing it as a lie. It's too late for you. You're too old for this. That calling was for a younger version of you. Look how much time has passed. Who starts over at this point? You hear me right now, that is the voice of the enemy, and it is terrified. It is terrified because it knows what you carry. It knows what has been forged inside you through every loss, every delay, every wilderness season you survived. It knows that weathered wisdom is more dangerous than youthful enthusiasm. It knows that a person who has been through the fire and still believes that person is unstoppable. Moses was 80 years old when God said now. Abraham was 100. Anna the prophetess served in the temple into her 80s, and she was in the room when the Messiah arrived. God does not disqualify by age, only fear does that. So, what does the final step actually look like? First, go back to the last clear instruction God gave you. Not 5 years ago, not the big vision, the last thing He told you to do that you haven't done yet. Maybe it was a conversation you've been avoiding, a gift you've been sitting on, a door you've been standing in front of but haven't knocked on, a forgiveness you haven't released, a yes you haven't spoken out loud yet. Go back there. That is your runway. Second, stop rehearsing your losses and start rehearsing your truth. Every morning your mind wants to replay what didn't work, who left, what broke, how long it's been. And every time you rehearse those things, you are practicing defeat. Philippians 4-8 is not a suggestion. It is a survival strategy. Think on things that are true, honest, just, pure, lovely, of good report. You have to discipline your mind the way a soldier disciplines their body, because the battlefield of the final step is fought first in your thoughts. Third, guard your atmosphere like your destiny depends on it, because it does. There are people in your life who drain the faith right out of a room. Not bad people, but voices that, every time you're around them, you walk away smaller than when you arrived. You cannot afford that anymore. Not at this stage. Not this close. Chosen one, you are crossing water. And when you are walking on what should be impossible, you cannot afford to look sideways. Here is what I want you to feel right now. Not pressure, not shame, proximity. You are closer than you have ever been. The dawn doesn't announce itself loudly. It arrives gradually, quietly, undeniably. And then, all at once, the whole sky changes. That is where you are. You are in the last moments before the sky changes. God never asked you to see the whole staircase. He asked you to trust Him with the next step. That's it. That's the entire requirement. Not perfection, not full understanding, not waiting until the fear disappears, because, beloved, the fear may not disappear before the step. The courage is in moving while it's still there. And when that step is finally taken, something extraordinary begins to happen inside a person. Something shifts. Something that was locked begins to open. Something that was silent begins to speak. Before this video ends, make a decision in your spirit. No more delay. No more shrinking. No more asking permission from fear. You have been faithful through seasons that would have broken most people. You have prayed through nights that felt endless. You have held on when letting go would have been easier. That faithfulness is not wasted. God has been building something with every year you thought he was silent. The step is here. The question is no longer whether God is ready. The question is, are you? You stepped through. Maybe not perfectly. Maybe with trembling hands and a voice that wasn't completely steady. Maybe with more fear than faith in that moment. But you stepped through, and heaven registered it. And now something is different. Not different the way the world promises, different, loud, immediate, visible. No, this is deeper than that. This is the kind of different that starts in the marrow before it shows up in the mirror. The kind of different that makes you sit in a quiet room and realize you are not the same person who walked into this season. That version of you, the one who kept apologizing for taking up space, the one who kept shrinking to make others comfortable, the one who kept surviving when God was calling you to arise. That version is stepping back. And something ancient, something prepared, something that was always inside, the pain is finally coming into full view. Hear me clearly. The breakthrough that is coming is not only external. The doors matter, the provision matters, the restoration matters, but none of that compares to what is happening inside you right now. Because for the first time in years, you are going to know what it feels like to move without the weight of who you used to be. The prophet Isaiah didn't just say God would do a new thing in your circumstances. He said, I will do a new thing in you. The wilderness wasn't the punishment. The wilderness was the classroom. And what gets built in the wilderness cannot be built anywhere else. Humility, depth, discernment, oil. You know what oil represents in Scripture. Anointing, preparation, readiness. And oil, real oil, is not produced by comfort. It is pressed out of something. Those hidden years, they weren't empty. They were pressing you. Those tears that felt wasted, heaven collected every single one. Psalm 56:8 says God puts your tears in a bottle. He keeps a record. Not one cry was forgotten. Not one night of waiting was invisible to him. The waiting was not empty. The waiting was weight-bearing. And now you are carrying a spiritual authority that people who bypass the process simply do not have. So let me tell you what emerges on the other side. Your discernment sharpens. You begin to hear clearly what you once had to strain for. The distractions that once pulled you sideways lose their grip. You start moving with a holy focus, not because you forced it, but because confusion was tied to that old identity, and that identity is dissolving. Your peace stops being fragile. It stops depending on whether the phone rings, whether the diagnosis clears, whether people approve. It becomes settled, rooted in something immovable. Philippians 4:7 calls it a peace that surpasses understanding, meaning you yourself won't be able to fully explain it. People will ask how you're so calm in the middle of what you're facing, and you'll smile because you know something they don't yet. Your boundaries become holy rather than guilty. You stop abandoning yourself to maintain everyone else's comfort, not with coldness, with clarity. You begin to protect your assignment like it is sacred, because it is. And your voice, oh, your voice. The voice that used to apologize before speaking truth. The voice that lowered itself so others wouldn't feel challenged. The voice that went quiet in rooms where it should have thundered. That voice is coming back. And it is coming back refined. It is coming back with language forged in the fire. It is coming back with a weight that only suffering can produce. When you speak now, something in the room shifts. Not because of your talent, because of your testimony. Think of dawn breaking over a New York City skyline. The city hasn't changed. The streets are the same. The buildings still stand exactly where they stood, but the light is different. Everything that was obscured by darkness is now visible. Every detail, every line, every face illuminated. That is what is happening to your life right now. Nothing about God's plan has changed. The assignment was always there. The calling was always yours. But the light of this new season is revealing what the darkness concealed. A sealed room is opening, and the light flooding in is not harsh, it is welcoming. It is like a morning that has been waiting for you specifically to step into it. Somewhere in the quiet courtroom of heaven, a new name is being spoken over you. Not the name that fear gave you, not the name that failure whispered, not the identity that your worst moments tried to make permanent. A new name, the name that was written before the foundation of the world, the name that matches the assignment. Revelation 2:17, I will give that person a white stone and a new name written on it, known only to the one who receives it. That is yours. That has always been yours. You are not approaching the end of your story. You are approaching the end of the version of you that kept surviving when God has been calling you to arise. Everything you endured, every door that closed, every relationship that ended, every prayer that seemed to dissolve into silence, every moment you felt invisible, unnecessary, forgotten, it was all building toward this. The tears were not wasted. The hidden years were producing weight, language, and oil. And now the pressing is done. If you believe God is bringing you into a new chapter, if something in your spirit just rose up while you were listening, write this in the comments right now. I'm stepping through. Because before I leave you, there is one final declaration you need to hear. This message is not complete until your spirit answers it. I need you to stay with me right here. Because what I'm about to speak over your life, this is not a closing. This is a commissioning. You didn't make it through everything you survived just to sit at the edge of your breakthrough and walk away. Not today. Not after everything it cost you to still be standing. So receive this word. Every syllable of it. The waiting season, the one that felt like it was swallowing you whole, it is breaking open right now. The labels people put on you, the ones you eventually started putting on yourself, too old, too late, too damaged, too far gone. Those labels are falling off you like dead skin. They were never yours to carry. They were assigned to you by people who couldn't see what God was building in the dark. And what God builds in the dark, he does not abandon in the light. Jeremiah 29:11 doesn't say, I had plans for you. It says, I know the plans I have for you. Present tense, active, alive. Right now, for you. Not for a younger version of you, not for a less wounded version of you, for the exact you that is watching this message at this exact moment. So let me speak this over you directly, and I need you to receive it, not just hear it. You are not forgotten. You are not behind. You are not disqualified. You are not too old. You are not too broken. What you are is standing at the edge of the final step. And I know that edge feels dangerous. I know it feels like standing on a ledge in the dark, not knowing how far the drop is. But chosen ones, God doesn't lead you to edges to watch you fall. He leads you to edges because that's where wings get discovered. Now, let me give you the truth that will unlock this entire season. The thing you thought was ending you, the grief, the silence, the long years of hidden faithfulness, the prayers that felt like they hit the ceiling and slid back down the wall, that wasn't God abandoning you. That was God emptying you. Because you cannot be filled with what heaven has prepared if you are still full of what the old season left behind. The exhaustion was evacuation. The isolation was insulation. The breaking was not your burial, it was your preparation. Isaiah 40:31 says, Those who wait on the Lord shall renew their strength. Not those who perform perfectly, not those who never doubted, those who waited. You have been waiting. That means the renewal is not coming. It is already moving toward you. And I need to ask you something that might shake you a little, because this is where chosen ones get it wrong at the very last second. What if the fear you've been feeling about the next step isn't a warning from God to stop, but resistance from the enemy, because he can see what's on the other side of your yes? Think about that. The devil does not waste warfare on people going nowhere. He doesn't pour pressure on lives that don't carry power. The intensity of what you've been walking through is not evidence that God left. It is evidence that your assignment carries weight that hell is afraid of. So, the fear? It just lost its vote. The old agreements, the ones you made with failure, with invisibility, with maybe this just isn't for me, those agreements are broken right now. In the name of Jesus, they are broken. What God began in you in secret, in the quiet rooms, in the car ride prayers, in the 3 a.m. conversations with heaven when no one else was watching, it will not die in silence. Hidden things in God's economy do not rot, they ripen. And your next chapter? Don't you dare call it fantasy. This is not wishful thinking. This is formation fulfilled. Every trial was curriculum. Every delay was development. Every door that closed was redirection toward a door that was built specifically for you, one that no other person on this earth has a key to. Revelation 3-8. I have set before you an open door that no one can shut. No one. Not your past, not your age, not your failures, not the people who counted you out. No one can shut the door God opens for you. The door in front of you is not opening because you became perfect. It is opening because after all you survived, you finally became willing. That's all heaven was waiting for. Not your perfection, not your performance, your willingness. And if you are watching this right now, something in your spirit already said yes before your mind could argue. That's not emotion, that's activation. So here is your charge, not a suggestion, a charge. Type Amen. I take the step in the comments right now. Let that be your declaration, your agreement, your flag planted in the ground of this new season. Share this with someone standing at a threshold right now. Someone who is one word away from not giving up. You could be the reason they stay. And if your spirit is already stirring, don't stop here. Go straight into the next message, because this is not where your strengthening ends. This is where it accelerates. Subscribe and stay close, because the messages coming are built for the season you are walking into, not the one you are walking out of. Chosen one, you have absolutely no idea what's coming next. But heaven does. And the final step is here.